Welcome to another episode of Masks Off. I'm Tia.
And I'm Kim.
And today we're going to talk about the martyr mask. And like always, we always start with a quote. So before we dig into the martyr mask, let's start with a quote from Susanna Barlow. The martyr uses sacrifice and suffering for others to hide their unwillingness to develop their own lives and cultivate their own creativity. So when you think about that quote and the martyr, it can be seen in different ways. So we can martyr ourselves because we think we're helping others, but in reality, are we martyring ourselves so that we don't have to actually follow our dreams and take ownership, step into our light? So it's interesting when you think about the martyr mask, how there's other layers, just like with other masks, right?
Incredible.
It's not always so obvious when you start to think about it. Kim,
Yeah,
how does the martyr mask show up for you?
I never thought about it that way. Honestly, until this very moment, I really never thought about it being a way for me to defer me stepping into my own light. I just assumed or figured that for the last 21 years, I've been a stay-at-home mom, and it just seems so natural and just seems so reasonable to think that I did sacrifice, because it seems like such a noble thing to do, to stay home and raise your kids. You know, my feeling position was, and my husband's as well, is that if I stayed home and I gave up my teaching career, which by the way, I didn't care that I gave that up. I wasn't thrilled.
It's kind of like me giving up engineering.
Yeah, I wasn't thrilled with that.
Here's that's an interesting thing. That's a way for us to step out without having to take ownership.
Yes, completely.
I have to leave my job, my good job, because I have to step into my duty of raising my children. Instead of saying I don't want to do it anymore at that moment.
Right, exactly.
Interesting.
That is interesting. Another layer that I hadn't seen. But so it just seems very noble or reasonable, plausible that I would choose to stay home with them so that they, you know, when they were sick, they didn't have to be at daycare, and that I could be home with them, and that they could do all the activities that they wanted to do when they got older. I can't even tell you how many times I drove back and forth across town. So from my home to their high school was literally across town, and I would take my daughter to school in the morning and pick her up from school so she didn't have to take the bus. Can I just tell you that, can I just say up front right now, they were spoiled. They were spoiled. There's no doubt.
You own it.
Goodness. I own it. I know. Oh my goodness. So I would drive her to school in the morning, and then if she had a sport or my son played football, and it was, you know, back and forth of football practice, back and forth. And so like the quote says, sacrifice and suffering, and all those years that I just kept deferring and putting off and putting aside what I truly wanted to do. And I'm not sure that I always knew exactly what I wanted to do. Like this path that I'm doing right now has unfolded and morphed as I have grown and developed.
Sure.
But there were things like traveling. You know, traveling was a big one. Traveling with girlfriends, going on a trip with girlfriends and leaving them behind. And we mentioned once before, there's a once a year for the last 5 or 6 years, an annual conference that both of us, you know, have attended. I attended once. It took me one time until my daughter was 17 that I finally said, okay, I'll go.
And that was the first time we finally met in face to face,
which was amazing. Yeah. Timing of it all, synchronicity, you know. And so I live in New York, and the conferences are in LA, and it was like, no way can I leave.
Because leave my children, even though they're old.
Here's right. And here's why, like I'm not going to lie. There were some times when I did take a weekend trip. I would go to a retreat to Kripalu Center, which is not far from my house. And I would leave on a Friday afternoon and be back by like Sunday morning. And it was, you know, a workshop or whatever.
Sure.
But I'm not kidding. Like the number of phone calls that I would get from home while I was away. And I don't blame anybody because I'm the one who put myself in this sacrifice role.
Exactly.
Of
co-creation, right?
Co-creation of I'm the go-to person. I wanted to be the one in control. I was the one who was taking care of everything. So of course, when things were falling apart or they didn't know where the ketchup was or the salt was, just as a silly example, of course they're going to call. But then I'm like, okay, I can't even get away for a stinking weekend without 20 phone calls.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. And
so I think the thing that can happen with the martyr, that I am aware of now and to be cautious of, is especially 21 years of sacrificing.
It's a long time, isn't it?
Right?
And some people do it their whole life.
There are some people who are caretakers their entire lives. I'm pretty sure my mother was one. And so the downside, or the part to be careful of, is the resentment that can build.
Yes. I don't think if you're doing the sacrifice from your heart fully, you don't have resentment.
Yes.
But if you start to notice you're feeling resentful, it's because you are being a martyr.
Yeah.
Because if you're not being a martyr, you won't have resentment because you're doing it truly because you want to.
Yes.
Where when we martyr, we're doing it because we want to, and or we may not be doing it because we want to, but we may be believing we're doing it because we want to, but you won't have resentment.
That's a really good point. And I think I had a mixture of it. You know, I had a mixture because looking back on it, I wouldn't trade it in for the world. I really am glad that I chose to stay home and raise them. And there were times when it was difficult. So I think it was a mixture.
Well, and it may even be a little more subtle than that, you know, because I did the same. I stayed home as well. I worked part-time on and off here and there. I think once they started going to preschool, but still my main job was being a mom.
Yeah.
So for me, that didn't feel like martyrdom or a sacrifice, choosing to stay home. But for me, the martyrdom was doing all the extra added things. Like you said, the driving around instead of saying, oh, maybe we could find someone else to help out with the driving. Or, you know, because as you remember, how many hours a day? Literally go somewhere, and sometimes it's not even worth coming back home. So I'd bring a book or do something, just sit in the car and wait or go for a walk. When in reality, there were other options. I just chose not to take them.
Take the bus.
Right. And so that's where the martyrdom for me was. It wasn't choosing to stay home with my kids, because I would do that again in a heartbeat.
Yes.
But it was the little things that would add up that, again, like you said, I chose to do them. That's completely on me. It's no one else's responsibility. It was my responsibility. And just noticing how over time it's like, oh, do it. But I really didn't want to do it. But did I look at having them find other options?
No.
Because I had to be the good mom, I had to martyr myself to live up to that standard that's not realistic, that we sacrifice over and over and over again.
It's so interesting how with all the masks and even all these episodes, if we really allow ourselves to go deep and go to the underlying underneath layer, look how often it comes back to, it's all about me.
Always.
Right? All about me. Like, oh, I just want to be seen as the good mom, the good person, the good wife, the good friend.
Right.
Right.
And it's all external.
All external. And how much we want to please, how much we want that approval. Because why? Because there's such a fear of being rejected.
Right.
If I
Being seen.
not being seen, or if I set a boundary and say no, and the other gets upset with me and then withdraws, pulls away, possibly abandons me emotionally.
It hurts.
Right. Right. And not only does it hurt, but it's our wiring. It is our wiring. We are wired for connection.
Right.
So if we feel that rejection or that abandonment, we equate that, our primitive brain associates that with not connected here.
Right.
Right. And if we talked about this before with the animals, with the herds, what happens if, or even in the tribal days, what happens if a person went away from the tribe? There is a really good chance that you might not survive.
There's a
if
risk.
You went off there's risk of
real
risk.
Yes.
Of being killed, attacked, whatever. So that part of our brain still exists, even though it's when we're rejected or somebody doesn't like us, so it's always going to the underneath.
It is. And I think, I'd love your input. So there's that old time primal, and that's a physical fear, right? Physical, potentially being harmed. And what we're talking about here with these masks, it's more a psychological fear of losing that connection. And that's the beauty, is as you continue to remove the mask and you continue to go within, you start to realize that I can create my own connection with myself within. So we can meet that internal need for connection first with ourselves. And we still need connection with others. Of course, that's part of being human.
Yeah.
But the need doesn't feel so great when we feel connected to ourselves, because we know we'll be okay. If that person we create a boundary and they do push back and they get upset and they may leave us for a time, or however that looks, we know we're going to be okay, because internally we are creating and fulfilling our own need for connection and our own need for good enoughness.
Yes.
That makes sense. So that primal piece is real, but it's been shifted psychologically, I think. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It does. And it is really important. And I, for the longest time, didn't know how to do this, or didn't do this, where I could go in and it's so good that you brought up about meeting the unmet need, because that is often what's going on within us, right? There's an unmet need of not being seen, not being heard, not being understood, just like you just explained. So I think it's a skill. It's a skill that I have learned to cultivate, to go in and take care of that. Well, first of all, I have to identify it. I have to be aware of what's going on, right? So how can we explain to the listeners and viewers, and how does it show up for you when you know there's something going on up here at the surface? You have to even first be able to be aware and recognize what's going on the surface before you can go underneath.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you don't have awareness.
Right. So what are some of the symptoms, right? We talked about that a little bit in the very beginning. For me, one of the things is if I start overeating, if I'm overeating or I'm wanting to grab for food, or my energy is feeling low, that's a warning sign to me that something's going on. Right. What about for you, or other signs?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's the awareness, right? So there's so many little levels. It's not like we can say, here, look for this, because it can be subtle. I think for me, it was learning how to really reconnect to my physical body, because my physical body is what's telling me. Like for you, you just said you want to eat, or, you notice the energy is low. And so as I learned to reconnect into the actual things my body is trying to tell me. So for example, if I know something's on the surface, oftentimes my throat will get tight, or just on a, not even physical, I feel more reactive. I'm pointing at the other, like, oh, they're just irritating me really bad. And so I know that is something that's really about me. I'm just projecting outward. So it's that physical piece. And when I feel irritation, And then the irritation can turn into, for me, numbing or whatever, coping, like, oh, I really want
Yep.
some chocolate.
Yep. Exactly.
And sometimes I do just want chocolate, but a lot of
Yes.
times that is not actually because of hunger. It's because
Yes.
I'm trying to numb or do something. Um, so it's that really noticing your body, really noticing when I'm reactive or just on edge. With the martyr mask, that resentment, if I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, they're asking more of me again.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't want to have to do that again. Okay. So that's clear to me that that martyr mask is like right in my face. So I have a choice. Do I want to put it on and be resentful, or do I want to set it aside and create a boundary? Or do I want to tap in and be like, do I want to do this? You know what? Actually, I do. I do want
Yeah.
to do this because I want to do it from my inside out. Yeah,
Takes so much work, doesn't it?
it does. But if this is new to you, I mean, and I'm assuming it was similar for you. It was a lot of work, but then it's like you said, it's a skill. It's exactly. So the more we
Yeah.
practice it, the easier it gets. Now, having said that, when like I'm tired or I have so many things on my plate going on, I don't have the energy for it, right? So I fall off, and it's not as easy as when I'm feeling more balanced and better self-care and all of that. Then I can do it in the moment. So that's another piece too, is, it's a skill of practice, but some days it's not easy.
I was just going to say that. I was just going to bring in the part about balance, how balance and self-care can sometimes be very difficult for the martyr. When you are, as the quote said, when you are using sacrifice and suffering for others, it's often hard to find the balance of self-care and then
Right.
help it and taking care of others. And I always try to use with myself and clients the saying that they always say on an airplane. It's such a great analogy, right? When the flight attendants are demonstrating the oxygen mask, they always say, please put your oxygen mask on before assisting others. So you need to give yourself oxygen first, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to help the other.
Exactly.
Or another one is to fill up your cup, metaphorically speaking, fill up your cup, because if you're already empty on energy, you're not going to be of great service to the other anyway.
And then it's only from martyrdom at that point.
Yes. And the other can feel it.
Yeah.
The other can feel it. They know it's not authentic.
It's like, a good point.
Oh, I think my kids knew when I didn't want to pick them up. They could feel the difference. Like when I was there for the fourth time, and I was like, oh, just like get in the car already,
Let's just get home.
And that's not fair to them, right? Because now, I may have just created an environment where they could potentially feel like they're a burden to me, right? And it's not. They're, again, about the co-creation.
Yes.
I chose to do that. I chose to pick them up instead of saying, hey, why don't you ask so-and-so's mom if they can give you a ride home, or ask so-and-so if we can carpool, or take the bus home. You know what? You can wait around for the late bus instead of me coming back again in the middle of rush hour.
Right.
So like that, just because I was unwilling to say no to them or to set a boundary, and then I did become irritable because I was running on low, and this is before I really had a good skill set, now I would do differently. So it is really important to have that balance.
Yeah. And it's hard to find the balance, and understanding that balance doesn't always mean you're right in the middle. Yeah. Balance means I'm going this way. Now I remember I come back. So it's a flow balance. It's not a perfectly balanced, stone on another stone. It wobbles, and knowing that's life.
It's a back and forth. Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm even trying to do that even now, even though I am stepping more into my own light, my own passion. But I do even find with doing a business, and we're doing our podcast, I find myself where I can spend too much energy and too much time with that. And then, my list of all these tasks or things I have to accomplish throughout the day.
Mm-hmm.
And so also, let me back up for a second. I shared once before that I have an autoimmune disease. And here's another analogy that I learned when having an autoimmune disease, because you don't want to get, I didn't want to get to, if we're thinking about a traffic light, I don't want to get to the red light, because if I get to red, that means that I have gone too far. And now I'm probably going to be down and out and not feeling well for a couple of days. So green is like, I'm feeling pretty good. I can go and do things. And then yellow is caution, right?
Yeah.
Yellow is caution.
Yeah.
So I need to slow down. I don't want to get to red where I now have hit the wall.
Mm-hmm.
I
And then
don't
you're
want
down for a while.
down for a while. And again,
Right.
It goes back to like the whole oxygen mask. If you're not able to take care of other people, if you're not helping yourself.
Right.
So I'm noticing that even with all of the business stuff, that I have to just really be mindful of taking a pause, taking a time out, maybe even every hour or so, just get up, take a walk outside, or do something to recharge.
Yeah. And I think that's so important too, especially for people out there with the martyr aspect in them, is that, like you said, self-care is so hard because it feels selfish, because we're so used to doing for others at the sacrifice of ourselves. And then when you turn the spotlight back on yourself, it feels weird.
Yeah.
And I love the analogy of the lights, the green light, yellow light, red. That is really helpful, because if you truly want to support and help others, it starts with supporting and helping yourself, because then you're giving from authenticity and you're making that conscious choice, right? There's that another skill again.
Yeah.
That I'm choosing to drive you across town.
I know.
And then you can enjoy your time together in the car, right? Versus driving. I mean, how many times have you, I know I have, biting my tongue driving. Like, I don't want to be doing this right now. I would rather be blah, blah, blah. But I never said anything. I just was annoyed. And it didn't make for a fun car ride. But if I had filled myself up or said, no, this doesn't work for me right now, that connection with others would be real.
That's such an important point right there. Yeah. You can't change the past.
Nope.
You can't do anything about the past, but I do have a lot of regret about that, because I had such I was so inauthentic. I didn't have that connection with my kids because I was feeling the martyrdom. Not always, but enough.
Yeah.
Enough.
It showed up.
Up.
But even, and I mean, I know that you know this, it's not regret, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't change it. You're in the present.
Yes.
And it's only helped you propel you to where you are today.
Yes.
Without that.
Yes. I wouldn't have learned.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And you have the ability to look back and see that and learn and make different choices moving forward, because you've gone within.
Right. It doesn't do any good to use the second arrow. Right.
Oh, we need to do an episode on that.
Yep. Second arrows.
I'm going to write that down right now. Second arrow. I think we've mentioned that a few times, but we never really did explain it, because I know that's something that needs a deeper explanation, I think.
Yeah. And just to say quickly, just for right now, so what a second arrow would be is, okay, the first arrow is that was the action that I didn't always create connection with my kids because I was wearing the martyrdom mask and feeling resentful or whatever I was feeling, just not wanting to be there. The second arrow is, now I continue to shame myself and guilt myself and beat myself up for having done that in the past.
Right. And you're avoiding going within.
And I avoid going within. Yes.
Bypassing.
Oh, yeah. Bypassing. And that one I want to bypass because I don't want to feel that one.
It's hard.
I don't want to feel the guilt. Guilt is the hard feeling for me. Guilt. Because then
guilt or shame?
Right. Good. There's a difference between the two.
Because I heard shame, not guilt.
Yes, you're right. Good point. Because guilt is, I did something wrong. Shame is, I did something wrong and I'm bad, or I am bad. I am wrong. I am a bad mom because I did all this.
Oh, and how many times do we hear that from ourselves and people we know?
Yeah. And then that loops into, okay, if I go underneath that ties into my perfectionist mask.
Yes.
Because gosh darn it, I have to be the perfect mom. You know, I have to have it all put together and know exactly what I'm doing all the time.
And I should drive them everywhere because that's what good moms do.
That's what good moms do. Or a good wife. Remember you with making the cookies?
Yep.
Right? Just being a good wife, or even like I can remember, and again, this goes into our boundaries. We really will have a good session on boundaries because it's so important. If I wasn't able to say no to even a friend, I can remember a particular friendship where anytime we would go someplace, not every time, but a lot of the time, well, where would you like to meet for lunch? Where would you like to meet for coffee? And if I would suggest a place, then it would be like, well, I'm not so sure about that place. How about this place?
Every time.
Yeah. So, and then I was just like, okay. Yep. So rather than saying no when I want to say yes, or saying yes when I want, you know what I'm saying? It's the boundary piece that becomes, the boundary piece is really hard, because then I'm not a good friend if I speak up and assert myself and say, well, you know, you did ask me where I wanted to go. And or forget even that, I would really prefer to go to this place. I really like this place. Can we go here this time? Like asserting myself in that way. First of all, I don't think women, not all women, I don't want to say all, but a lot of women have a difficult time speaking up and asserting themselves, because then they look like the bitch, you know, like, who are you to speak? There's that, who are you again?
Yeah, exactly.
Who are you to speak up and ask for what you want and what you need? Go sit in the corner. Be unseen,
put
unheard.
on your martyr mask and put on this mask and this one and just.
Yeah. Because you know what? The person who acquiesces and the person who is goes with the flow is looked upon sometimes. Oh, isn't she just so nice?
Oh,
she's so nice because she's so easygoing. Oh, I like to be around her. She just, you know, she doesn't give me a hard time.
Exactly.
She doesn't make
me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. And you know what? And I can get my way with her. Oh my gosh. Boy, there are so many layers to this martyr mask.
Oh my gosh, yes.
I didn't even realize how much I wear the stinking thing.
Surprise!
Yes.
It's a good one.
Yes.
To be aware of, at least.
Yeah. If there's one thing I do definitely want to continue to work on, and we said, you know, it's a journey, not a destination, is my boundaries. My boundaries.
They're hard.
They're really hard.
They are hard.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll have, I think we'll have several boundary episodes. Because
for sure.
They, you know, it's easy to think them. It's another to do them.
For sure. Because then it's just like, oh, you know.
Alrighty.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for listening to today's episode.
And we'll catch you on the next one.
Look forward to seeing you soon. Take care, everyone.